I really do think that those who are concerned about war, those who are concerned about the growing inequality in this country, those who are concerned about climate change, about the fate of the planet, are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media. We can't let it be silenced by the public media, which is why we have to take it all back.
We're going to talk tonight about this moment and how it is that we push this president, and I do mean push this president in this second term. We'll talk about that as we've been talking about it on our radio programs and TV programs for quite some time now. But there's also another conversation we want to engage tonight, and it's really a conversation about the democratization of public media. All of us on this stage tonight have, by choice, not by chance, but by choice, given our lives and part of our lives, at least, and part of our careers to public radio. I've had any number of opportunities. In fact, I have worked in commercial media, as many of you know, and have opportunities regularly to return to commercial media if I wanted to do that. I've chosen to stay in the world of public media, on public television and public radio for some very specific reasons. But I am concerned, and I didn't get concerned like most Americans when Romney went after Big Bird. I had concerns about public media prior to that, so we want to talk tonight, and we're so honored to have this long-distance runner, Amy Goodman, with us tonight. A long-distance runner. Yeah. And so I am so much looking forward to Amy's comments about democratizing public media and the lack of diversity even now in public media. So let me just say a few words about that, then a few words, reflections at least on the election, and I'm going to take my seat, and I've got 12 minutes to do this to keep us on time. But one of the reasons why Dr. West and I are here tonight is because we got shanked the other day by WBEZ. We got shanked by BEZ, and as is the case when one gets shanked, you don't see it coming. And so let me just be very clear about this and do this quickly. I've been very grateful to WBEZ for most of my public radio career for having the opportunity to be carried over their airwaves. But as I said in my open letter to the president and CEO, something is wrong in a city like Chicago, a majority-minority city. A majority-minority city. Something is wrong, Father Flager, when it's easier for a black man from Chicago to be president of the United States than it is to anchor a primetime program on WBEZ. Something is wrong with that. And when the president and CEO decided to pull the plug on the show, and Dr. West and I would go to our graves believing that there was some politics, obviously, that were a part of that mix. I heard somebody say, duh. There's some politics that were a part of that mix. We've been on the program, we've been on the station for 2 years, talking about accountability. And then 6 weeks before Election Day, we unceremoniously get yanked off the air. No phone call, no prior notice, no complaints about the program. Just out of the blue, they pull the plug on Smiley and West. I said in my open letter, and I say again tonight, this is not the first time in my life that I've been canceled. It ain't going to be the last. Part of being in public media means that decisions are made. Amy knows this as well as I do. Decisions are made, and things happen, and shows are canceled, and shows are brought on. Shows have different life cycles in public media, both on television and on radio, not unlike commercial media. Programs have life cycles. So this is not about Tavish whining. I was on WGN radio today, and I was asked, why are you whining about being canceled by WBEZ? Why did you come to Chicago to whine about this? And I said, this is not about whining. Dr. West makes a wonderful distinction between people who whine and people who wail. And they're two different things. Bob Marley and the Wailers. That visceral wail and a whine are two different things. I'm not a whiner. So that's not what this is about. It's not about being canceled. It's about the lies you told about why we were canceled, about not wanting to address the truth, and about trying to skirt the real issue, the politics of the decision, by attacking Amy Goodman, who had nothing to do with this. Amy wasn't nowhere around. And he goes into the Chicago Sun-Times and attacks Dr. West and I for having a program that they've carried for 2 years that he referred to as crap. That's his word. So we get labeled as crap. And then he takes a side swipe at Amy Goodman and saying the problem with our program is it's starting to sound too much like Democracy Now!, too much advocacy journalism. And so, too much advocacy journalism. And I said, Dr. West and I said to the president and CEO that the only thing that we have advocated for 2 years on this program is making poverty a priority in America. The only thing we've advocated for. We've advocated for poor people not being rendered invisible. We've said time and time again, it is the telling of truth that allows the suffering to speak. And so somebody's got to take to the airwaves and speak to the suffering of millions of Americans of both parties, of all races and all colors and all creeds. Somebody's got to speak to that pain and that suffering. And so we said to the president and CEO, if our crime is one of advocating for the poor, then we stand accused. We stand accused. And furthermore, we stand accused and happily plead guilty. Something is wrong when even public media has become the playground of the 1%. When public media has become a wholly owned subsidiary of the 1%, rather than speaking to the trouble and travail and tribulation of the 99, something is wrong in Chicago. Something is wrong with public media. And so Chicago becomes a sort of ground zero in this fight now that Amy's been engaged in for years and that I've been engaged in for years, not as long as she. That Dr. West has now joined us in over the last couple of years with his voice on public media. We got to have a conversation about how we democratize these airwaves. And I tell you now, I just saw it today, the president and CEO of WBEZ has now taken to a national campaign, not just local anymore, a national campaign to demonize Dr. West and myself and Amy Goodman. There is a magazine, a publication called Current. It's called Current. Current is like the Bible for those of us in the public media world. It's kind of like Daily Variety or the Hollywood Reporter out in L.A. where I live for those in the business of entertainment. Magazine called Current. It comes out next week, and I've already seen the letter that the president and CEO of WBEZ has written, not a letter, an article, an essay that he's written in next week's issue, where he takes us to task for destroying public radio by engaging in what he calls advocacy journalism. And so I spent all day today in between running around doing interviews trying to tighten up my response. Dr. West hasn't seen it yet, so he'll look at it a little later tonight. I'm sure by the time he gets done with it, it'll really be ready to go. But we're going to respond to that in Current magazine next week. But I'm raising this issue right now because Mitt Romney is no longer relevant. Mitt Romney is no longer relevant, but I don't want us to take this, as Dr. King would say, this tranquilizing drug of believing that Big Bird is safe. I don't want us to believe that public television and public radio are safe just because he's no longer on the ballot, because he has a whole bunch of friends who are still controlling the U.S. House. A lot of friends who still control the House. And so I don't think this debate about the future of public media in America is anywhere near over. This debate in many ways is starting to heat up. When this letter hits next week, and you're in Chicago, so you know about how important and what a stalwart public media outlet WBEZ is, but across the country it is highly regarded. You start talking about public media, the mainstream public media, if I can use that phrase. Amy's on the Pacifica Network. They do great work. If you're talking about these NPR affiliates, mainstream public media, you're talking about stations like WNYC in New York. You're talking about WGBH in Boston. And you're talking about WBEZ in Chicago. I mean, they decide that they want to push a particular agenda. They have the power to do that. I want to remind everybody in this room tonight, and for those who don't know, let me share this with you. When public media came into existence, this is in the Johnson years, it won't surprise any of you that that same president that brought us the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act was so concerned about the imbalance in public media that they started something that you see all the time on PBS called CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. When they started that back in 1967 in the Johnson administration, there were only two groups of Americans who were mentioned in the charter. Only two groups of Americans mentioned in the charter. So public media was supposed to provide a platform, Lupe, for these underserved, undervoiced communities. They were children, and as we would call then, minorities. Now, we can't use the word minority in Chicago because it's a majority minority city, but children and minorities are the only two groups mentioned in the charter. Children have been well served by PBS because of Sesame Street and my favorite, Conjunction Junction was, yo, you understand, yes. So children have been well served in America by public media, but all these years later, we still have not gotten around to serving people of color through public media. And so you have a handful, I say this respectfully, but you got a handful, respectfully, a handful of white liberal elites who think that public media is their personal playground. And so you have to fight as a person of color, as a woman, you have to fight to carve out your own space. You have to fight to create a democratic space to have conversations that otherwise would not be heard in public media. I can't begin to tell you the number of people who appear on my NPR, on my public radio programs, and certainly on my PBS program. By the way, when you get home tonight, I have a wonderful guest on my PBS program I recorded just before I left LA to come here. Her name is Amy Goodman on PBS tonight. So while we're here in Chicago talking to you, the whole country is going to get a conversation tonight about the democratization of public media, courtesy of PBS and my television program tonight. But we have a system here. I'll come back to my point in a second. But we have a system here where this handful of elites think they own and control these media outlets. And that's not what the charter called for in the first place. And so all these years later, we're fighting to try to democratize the airwaves. And so you get a program, and again, Doc and I don't have a monopoly on the truth, and I say all the time, one of the lines I wrote in this letter that will appear, this response in Current next week, is that Dr. West and I certainly don't have a First Amendment. I got a First Amendment right to free speech. That I do have. A First Amendment right to free speech. I do not have a First Amendment guarantee to a public radio program. So I'm subject to being canceled like anybody else. But the problem is that you can't ever getting around to creating the kind of content that serves all of Chicago. And then the one program that you do have, you kick it to the curb without any prior notice, no conversation, then go into the media in Chicago and make pejorative statements about that. This is why, and I'm taking my seat in a minute, this is why I want to say this now, and you tell them I said it. More than tell them I said it, I want you to pay attention to this in Chicago, and more than paying attention to it, I want y'all to do something about this in Chicago. When you get home tonight, I want you to log on and read about WBEZ's purchase of WRTE. Google it and read about it right here in Chicago. WRTE, a Hispanic station that BEZ has already done a deal to purchase. It's now sitting at the FCC. The FCC has to approve the sale. There's one thing that stands between that sale. You see where I'm going with this, right? If they have not shown already any capacity, any consistency to serving the broader public in Chicago, what makes us think when they get this station under their belt that they aren't going to colonize it as well? And so I want you to read up about this. Y'all figure out, I'm going back to LA tomorrow. I want y'all to figure out how y'all going to respond to this. But this is how the stations that do offer opportunities for others to be heard end up being wiped out. They get purchased, they get flipped, and the rest is history. And so this is what we're up against. We are up against right now a sentiment within the system that still doesn't take seriously the concerns of all of America. Final word about this election, and I'm going to yield to Amy and to Dr. West. Again, my job tonight was just to kind of frame this conversation and set this up, and they can take it on to the mountaintop. I want to say this. I've said this consistently. I'm amazed. Dr. West and I were talking in the car on the way over. I've been amazed, Father Flager and Gator and all of you who've been following this. I've been amazed over the last 48 hours at the number of people who have finally now figured out that this president in the second term has got to be pushed. Now, all I want to do is to repeat the same refrain that I have said for 5 years, even at risk of being persona non grata in my own African American community. But I'm saying the same thing now that I said 5 years ago. That great presidents aren't born, great presidents are made. They have to be pushed into their greatness. There is no Abraham Lincoln without Frederick Douglass pushing him. There is no FDR without Chicago's own A. Philip Randolph pushing him. There is no LBJ without MLK pushing him. Left to his own devices, Barack Obama will end up being, even with a second term, left to his own devices and the folk around him, he's going to end up being another garden variety politician as opposed to a statesman. We want him to end up being transformational, not just transactional. But the time has come now for action and no longer accommodation. For action and not accommodation. Did you see how fast? Did you see? I love them, and I ain't mad at them. I love them. I ain't mad at them. Did you see how fast the leaders in the Hispanic community got on their conference call the day after the election? Oh, they made it abundantly clear. They had a national media conference call the day after the election. Florida still hadn't been called yet. It didn't matter to them. The president had won, and he had won with their support. They came through for Barack Obama in 4 or 5 major states. He owes them. Of course, he owed them 4 years ago. Just never got around to paying the debt 4 years ago. But now he owes them. There's a line wrapped all around the White House tonight, this figurative line wrapped around the White House of all the people who've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for the president of these United States to take their issues, their demands, their pain, and their suffering seriously. I say to African Americans, we taught the world how to protest. We taught the world how to demand change. We taught the world about what social justice really means. And here's my fear. I speak now to the black community. Here's my fear. That if we ain't careful, at the end of 8 years, not even 4, at the end of 8 years, every leading economic indicator category may very well suggest that in the era of Obama, black folk lost ground, not gained ground. And if and when that dreadful day arrives, we're going to have a serious come to Jesus meeting about the price of the ticket. About the price of the ticket. Now, I don't want that to be the reality, but it will be the reality if every one of us in black America, in Hispanic America, in progressive America writ large, unless and until we get serious about understanding that the time is far spent for us to understand that we ain't got but a couple of years before he becomes a lame duck to make our demands, to let our voices be heard. And I don't want us to wait too long to figure that out. And so, this president, I repeat, is going to have to be pushed. Public media is going to have to be pushed. This won't come as a surprise to anybody in this room because you all know that advocacy is not a spectator sport. You got to get off the sideline and get involved in the game, get involved in the process. And that's why I'm so honored and so humbled and so moved that so many of you have packed this place out in these overflow rooms tonight to start a conversation here in Chicago about how you can be ground zero in the president's hometown to help push him into his greatness, and how you can get a conversation started about how we democratize and bring some diversity to public media. I want to close my remarks by thanking the stations that came to our rescue when we got shanked by BEZ. Let me ask you to show your love so you can hear Smiley and West now, courtesy every Sunday at 3 o'clock, courtesy of WCPT. Please thank Chicago's Progressive Talk. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know where. I'm looking for the leader of CPT. Charlie, is Charlie in here? Brother Charlie goes with Brother Charlie. Is he in here? He's here. We saw him backstage. Brother Charlie, we thank him for. There's Charlie. Come on out. That's Charlie. Wave, Charlie. That's Brother Charlie. Runs WCPT. Charlie, we thank you. We thank you. So that's Sundays at 3. You can hear us on WCPT. And not to be outdone, my friends at WVON. I just love saying WVON. I prefer to say the voice of the Negro. I just love saying that. The voice of the Negro. So WVON Saturdays at 11, you can also hear Smiley West. So that's how the Lord works, Father Flaggy. One station cancels you, and 2 pick you up. Please thank WVON for carrying us on Saturdays at 11 a.m. All right. I think I've gone 5 minutes over, but I think I've laid the foundation now for the kind of conversation that we need to have in this room tonight. It is my honor. She needs no introduction, obviously, but it is my honor to say how indebted this nation is to Amy Goodman. Amy, against all of the odds, day in and day out, tells the hard truths. For telling those hard truths, as I said a moment ago, she ends up getting shanked when she ain't even in the conversation. This was about Smiley and West, and Amy Goodman finds her way in the conversation because she's carved out a space, a democratic space for conversations, again, that wouldn't happen but for her presence. I know something about the kind of pushback one gets when one tries to be consistent to the truth. And so where these conversations are concerned, there is no one in the country that we are more honored to share the stage with tonight than Amy Goodman. And before I take my seat and yield to Amy, let me just say that I regard Dr. West as this nation's leading public intellectual. He is the nation's leading public intellectual. And the reason... The reason why I have enough jobs, I'm working like a Jamaican. I didn't need to have another radio program. I created Smiley and West because I so love that mind of his. He has a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love, and a mind I would give everything in the world to just have a piece of. The best I can do is hang out with him every day and talk to him and hope some of it kind of rubs off. But I created Smiley and West because I thought the world needed to have access to his heart and have access to his head. So, Dr. West, I want you to know I'm honored every week to be on this radio program with you. Chicago, please show your love for the host of Democracy Now!, the author of The Silenced Majority, Amy Goodman.
Well, it's a real honor to be here with all of you, and what a place to be together in Chicago. As you were saying, yes, this is the home of the next and last president of the United States, last meaning in 2008 and now 2012, one of the greatest organizers of the 20th century, A. Philip Randolph, the home of Emmett Till as well. And let's just bring all of that together today. When we talk about the importance of public media opening up, I see the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day: war and peace, life and death. Anything less than that is a disservice to the servicemen and women of this country, because they can't have these debates on military bases. They rely on us in civilian society to have the discussions that lead to the decisions about whether they live or die, about whether they are sent to kill or be killed. Anything less than that is a disservice to a democratic society. Now, I originally come from Pacifica Radio, which was founded in 1949 in the Bay Area. A war resistor came out of World War II named Blue Hill and said there's got to be a media outlet that's not run by corporations that profit from war, but run by journalists and artists. And that's how Pacifica was born. The first station, KPFA in Berkeley, 1949, 59 KPFK in Los Angeles, 60 my station WBAI in New York, WPFW in Washington went on the air in 77, KPFD in Houston went on the air in 1970. That's the only radio station in the country whose transmitter was blown up. It was blown up by the Ku Klux Klan. They strapped dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it to smithereens. Now, it wasn't like Pacific had money for advertising, so the silver lining was it certainly blew it into the consciousness of the potential listening audience of the people of Houston. And when they got back on their feet again, the Klan blew it up again. Now, I don't remember if it was the Grand Dragon or the Exalted Cyclops or the Imperial Wizard, because I often confuse their titles. But he said it was his proudest act, and I think that's because he understood how dangerous Pacifica was, how dangerous independent media can be, how important public media is when it is doing its job. Important and dangerous because it allows people to speak for themselves. And when you hear someone speaking from their own experience, a kid in the South Bronx or a Palestinian child, an Israeli grandmother or an uncle in Afghanistan, it breaks down barriers that fuel the hate groups. It challenges the stereotypes and the caricatures that allow hate to fester. Back in World War II, when the U.S. was about to bomb Japan at the end of the war, Secretary of War Stimson was handed a target list of the possible Japanese cities to destroy. It said Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Kyoto, and Secretary Stimson crossed Kyoto off the list. Why? Because he and Mrs. Stimson had visited Kyoto. It was a beautiful city. The people were wonderful, the food delicious, the art was magnificent. If only the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been lucky enough to host the Stimsons, how many hundreds of thousands of people would then be alive afterwards? Now, the reason this is such a profound point and has a lesson for us all in public media is the reason he didn't want to destroy Kyoto is he knew it. He had been there. That is the power of media. How do we learn about the rest of the world and other communities in our own country? Well, if not through our friends and family, it's through the media. And it is absolutely critical that the lens through which we see the world and the rest of our country be an independent lens. And equally important that the lens through which the world learns about us not be brought to you by the weapons manufacturers. And even in the conversation we have with each other, the microphone, when we're talking about war, not be brought to you by the weapons manufacturers. When we're talking about climate change, not brought to you by the oil, the gas, the coal, and the nuclear companies. When we're talking about health care, not brought to you by the insurance industry, by Big Pharma. We need a media that is independent. where people can describe their own experiences, and when they can't, that we can describe what is going on until they can speak for themselves. I want to thank, by the way, Haymarket Books that got this hall today. And I want to thank Can TV, Channel 19 here in Chicago. Every morning, Can TV runs Democracy Now! Live at 7 a.m. Public access, we must preserve it, protect it, expand it around the country. It's a huge natural resource that people national resource that people don't always know about. Public access in your own community where you can make your own media. Democracy Now! Used to broadcast on WLUW, the Loyola station just down the street, but then Chicago Public Radio bought WLUW. We have to open up the airwaves, the public airwaves, put the public back in public media. You know, Democracy Now! Began 16 years ago as the only daily election show in public broadcasting on a few dozen community radio stations in 1996. The week of September 11, 2001, we went on one TV station in New York. It was connected to the media center we broadcast out of, an old firehouse just blocks from Ground Zero. In fact, we were the closest national broadcast when the September 11th attacks took place, and we went on as emergency broadcasting on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. It's the CAN of Manhattan. And from that day, TV stations around the country started saying, can we run this show? We started sending out by FedEx, because I thought it was breaking news. We couldn't send the video cassettes by snail mail. Garbage bags filled through the FedEx men with these video cassettes. More and more stations started to take us, and then when we'd be on TV, the NPR station in town would say, could we run you? And then the PBS station in town. We are now broadcasting on more than 1,100 public radio and television stations around the country and around the world. Turning the formulas for public media on its head, reaching out to a younger audience and my more diverse audiences, and the stations were on the NPR stations were on. We beat All Things Considered and Morning Edition hands down in fundraising because people are hungry, I think it is, hungry for independent voices. Aren't you tired in all of the networks of that small circle of pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong? With this election day come and gone, the work of movements just begins, and we need a media that gives voice to those movements. November 4th, right here in Chicago, 2008, was Election Day. I think the world heaved a sigh of relief on that day. I mean, here you had Barack Obama, elected president, the first African-American president in a land with a legacy of slavery. Yes, it was historic. And what was also historic is the number of movements that had come together to elect their president. The peace movement. I mean, I think the main difference between President Obama and Hillary Clinton in running for the Democratic nomination was that he was opposed to the war in Iraq. She was for it. She voted for it. She hung on to that position to almost the bitter end. She saw she was going down on it. So at the very end, she said, maybe I was wrong. But Barack Obama won the nomination, went on to win the presidency. The environmental movement. I mean, what we are dealing with today, people saw back then. I've just come from New York where the superstorm hit, right? Where we see in Colorado and California the fires raging through the country, the Dust Bowl conditions of the Midwest, climate change. Climate change. Environmentalists elected President Obama, but then he went to Copenhagen and scuttled the UN's climate change summit meaningful agreement around greenhouse gas emissions. I think many environmentalists were shocked, and that went on to continue to happen in Cancun and in Durban, South Africa, where these UN summits were, where Democracy Now! Broadcasts throughout the week. But what was amazing about these summits, not so much the people inside, but outside, the thousands of people who gathered from around the world, giving voice, this urgent voice, to how we can save the planet. You know, my colleague Dennis Moynihan and I, who are live streaming Democracy Now! Today, and a shout out, live streaming this event today, and a shout out to everyone who's watching around the world. The book we just wrote called The Silenced Majority, the reason we call it that is because the silenced majority. I really do think that those who are concerned about war, those who are concerned about the growing inequality in this country, those who are concerned about climate change, about the fate of the planet, are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media. We can't let it be silenced by the public media, which is why we have to take it all back. Yes. Now, I know this is a story that you all know. I shared it with Tavis on the show that'll be on later tonight on Tavis's PBS program, but it's so instructive. When President Obama was running first for president, he was in a New Jersey backyard speaking to a group of about 100 people. And a guy at the very back raised his hand and said, "What are you going to do about the Middle East?" And interestingly, presidential candidate Barack Obama shared the story of A. Philip Randolph meeting with FDR. I know many of you must know the story, but Eleanor Roosevelt brought A. Philip Randolph to meet with FDR. A. Philip Randolph, who had organized the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, went on to organize the 1963 March on Washington, brought him to meet with FDR when he was president and described the condition of working people in this country, of black people in this country, and FDR listened intently, the story goes, and said, "I don't disagree with you," he said to A. Philip Randolph, "but you're going to have to make me do it. Make me do it." Interestingly, this is the story that Barack Obama shared when asked about what he was going to do with the Middle East. But I think that is such an important story in understanding the way democracy works. When people say, what will be the legacy of this president? I think as a journalist, and as a citizen of this country, and as non-citizens too, the question isn't what is the legacy of one man, but what is the legacy of this country that you want to leave, and what are you going to do about it? Let's look at this past year. It has been a remarkable year of movements, right? December 2010, you have the Tunisian uprising. A young man named Mohamed Bouazizi sets himself on fire because he's so frustrated. He can't get a job. He's selling fruit and vegetables in the marketplace. The authorities steal his scale. And he sets himself on fire, and it ignites the frustration of a generation and a nation. And something else I think also ignited Tunisia, and that was WikiLeaks, a story we must talk about because the corporate media does not reveal what it is that WikiLeaks revealed. It is so important when you have countries that are cracking down on information. Transparency is our only hope, and as journalists, that is our job, is to dig deep, is to make the world more transparent if we possibly can. It's why the New York Times worked with WikiLeaks, why The Guardian worked with WikiLeaks, El País in Spain and Der Spiegel in Germany, because all of these millions of documents were being released showing the internal workings of the U.S. government. And the State Department cables that released show that the U.S. government knew that Ben Ali, the Tunisian dictator, was brutal and corrupt, and yet continued to fund him to the tune of millions of dollars. And that furthered the ire of the population of Tunisia. And then, of course, you had the Egyptian revolution ignited by what happened in Tunisia. How many of you experienced the Egyptian revolution through the reporting of Democracy Now!'s Sharif Abdel-Qaddous, a remarkable young reporter, son of an illustrious family in Egypt. His grandfather, one of the most famous writers in Egypt, Hassan Abdel-Qaddous, he flew home from Democracy Now! Directly into Tahrir. And when the satellites were taken down by the thugs and the international networks and the U.S. networks were used to relying on the satellites, I remember seeing Anderson Cooper in a hotel room on a kind of fuzzy Skype with a lower third that said, reporting from an undisclosed location. And there was Sharif in the middle of Tahrir, describing his community that was fomenting a revolution, interviewing Ahdaf Souef, the great Egyptian writer who wrote Map of Love, and Nawal Saadawi, the 79-year-old feminist former presidential candidate who had been exiled under Mubarak and imprisoned under Sadat, who'd been holding salons for young people right before Tahrir, saying, "We will win, we will win," and interviewing a young girl in the shadow of the mass media, state media building that had spewed lies for so long. And she was putting out a broadsheet called Voices of Tahrir. And because Democracy Now! Has always pioneered ways of getting around the expensive satellite communication system, we were able to, Sharif and Hani Massoud, our video producer, could send these 25-minute reports of the people speaking for themselves through the internet when the satellites were down. And you got to hear this remarkable story of families, of communities that were changing the world. And there was Sharif in the middle of Tahrir, now being interviewed on MSNBC, on NBC, on CNN, every hour of every day. Of course, on Democracy Now! We call that trickle-up journalism. That's the power of public media. And then we moved to Wisconsin, inspired, I think, partly by Arab Spring, but also partly by, yes, the governor, Scott Walker. Who would have thunk it, that after he got elected, he was going to go after public unions? And so Democracy Now! Flew directly into Madison, to the state capitol, where the people were taking over. These are the voices that are making history. And I think I met some of the biggest guys I've ever met in my life, the Oshkosh prison guards. In the Capitol, I said to them, "Who did you vote for?" They said, "Well, for Governor Walker, of course." I said, "Then what are you doing here?" And they said, "Protesting Governor Walker, of course." And I said, "Why?" They said, "He didn't tell us he was going after our wives, the teachers, our neighbors, the nurses." Oh, did I acknowledge Karen Lewis, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, in the audience? And these prison guards said, he didn't tell us this is what he was going to do. And I knew Governor Walker was in trouble when outside 150,000 people gathered in the freezing cold, the largest protest Wisconsin had ever seen. And I interviewed this older guy, white hair, glasses, holding a sign that said IRS auditors against Walker. We knew he was in trouble. But especially for young people here and being at a university, for people thinking, well, in decades ago, the struggles were much more clear-cut. They were black and white, like when Dr. King was organizing the civil rights movement. Now it's a little grayer. I think you should think again. In 1932, AFSCME was born in Wisconsin, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees. Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4th, 1968. What was he doing in Memphis? Simply organizing sanitation workers who were trying to organize an AFSCME local, 1707. There is a continuum. And then we move on to, the immigrants' rights movement in this country that is the modern-day civil rights movement. Being in Charlotte the first day of the Democratic Convention, they understood what FDR said, "Make me do it." They came to the Democratic Convention because I think what happened on November 4th, 2008, and what's happening again, is people felt that they had hit their heads against a brick wall for so long. The wall became a door, the door opened a crack. The question was, would it be kicked open or slammed shut? And that's not up to that one person in the White House, no matter how powerful he is. It is up to all of you in this room and people all over this country. When those who are used to having the ear of the most powerful person on earth whisper their demands, in his ear in the Oval Office, if he can't point out the window and say, if I do that, they will storm the Bastille, if there's no one out there, he's in big trouble. And that's when he agrees with you. What about when you don't agree with him? When the community organizer-in-chief becomes the commander-in-chief, who becomes the community organizers then? That is the challenge to people all over this country right now, whether we're talking about public media or we're talking about democracy in this country and where we want to go. And I think that young dreamers understand this very well. It's not going to happen just by one person being in the White House. And so they have occupied President Obama's campaign offices and other senators and Congress members' offices. They risk more than arrest when they sit down. They risk deportation, yet they did it anyway. And you know, President Obama understands Frederick Douglass's dictum, power concedes nothing without a demand, it never has and it never will. He was humiliated by these young protesters, the kind of protests he was involved in the past. And so he did concede. And he said, okay, some young people 30 or under can get a reprieve from deportation if they meet certain criterion. And this was a huge victory for the young dreamers. But the DREAM Act wasn't passed, and they said this isn't enough, and they came with their parents to Charlotte, North Carolina. It was an amazing scene. I was just walking in to cover the first day of the convention. I got a text, go to this corner, because there's an action taking place. I go to the corner, and this undocubus pulls up. It's covered with butterflies. It's filled with undocumented immigrants, young and old. In fact, it was a mother who came out of the bus first, and her name was Rosie Karaskow. She starts to talk, and a media personality comes up to me. I'd been on panels with him. I won't name him. He's famous on television. And he said, what are these people doing? And I said, I think they're about to get arrested. He said, tell me what they want. And I said, well, why don't you ask them yourself? And he said, Amy, just summarize it for me. But I'm interviewing Rosie Karaskow. I said, Rosie, why don't you tell this gentleman what you want? And she said, I want to know what kind of legacy President Obama wants to leave. She said, I want to know if he wants to be remembered as the president who deported more immigrants than any president in history, or if he wants to be remembered as the president who sided with the immigrants. Pretty eloquent. And he started to take notes in his reporter's notebook. And then her husband came out, Martin Nzweta, just as they were chanting, no papers, no fear, no papers, no fear. And he said, I've paid taxes in this country for 18 years, which is more than Citibank can say. And then they walked to the front of the convention. They unfurled a banner with butterflies. I asked a young woman who was kneeling as the police were pouring in, and the rain was pouring down, why the butterflies? She said, because butterflies know no borders. Butterflies are free. And with that, 10 of these young immigrants and their parents got arrested at the Democratic Convention. And their organizing is continuing, as Tavis was just describing. These are the movements that have made this country great. And I know I only have a few minutes, and I want to get to the ring around the Rose Garden at the end of August, beginning of September. The environmentalists who went to the White House to tell President Obama, we don't want you to approve the Keystone XL pipeline going from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico, led by indigenous people, and Bill McKibben of 350.org. 1,200 people got arrested, and then they came to New York, September 17, 2011, and that was Occupy. That was Occupy Wall Street. Now, why is this so significant a lesson to public radio and television as well as to commercial media? There was almost no coverage the first week, even as thousands marched on this area right next to Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street. I was watching one of the corporate networks after a week of silence, and they just couldn't ignore it anymore. I mean, these news personalities had to walk by the encampments to get to work. And they started to laugh. And they said, who are these people? What do they want? What is it? They can't even choose a spokesperson. They can't figure out what message. They've got every different sign. And I thought, really? They can't figure out what their message is. I think any Madison Avenue PR exec would have drooled to be the one to have come up with perhaps the most resonant slogan in U.S. history. We are the 99%. And it didn't surprise me going down there one day when I saw one Dr. Cornel West right there in the middle of Occupy Wall Street. And the word occupy has occupied the language. I think Mahatma Gandhi said it best. You know, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Take that in. That's very important as movements have changed this country. Let me talk about the pizza pies for 1 minute that were flying into Zuccotti Park as Egyptians were ordering from the local New York pizzeria, sending in online saying, sending those pizzas to feed the protesters. And then you had Wisconsinites saying, send the pizzas into Occupy Wall Street to feed them. And the Occupy protesters called their pizza pies Occupies, and they ate them. And there were so many pizza pies, they set up buffets. Hundreds would line up. You know, this is right next to Wall Street. I saw bankers online. They heard there was a free lunch in town. And then they used the tops of the pizza pie boxes, the occupiers, for signs, conservationist, if nothing else. And their signs said things like, I'll believe a corporation is a person when Texas executes one. Now, there were other signs that people carried in on September 17th, and they said, too much doubt, and I am Troy Davis. Too much doubt, and I am Troy Davis. Occupy began on September 17th, 2011. Troy Davis was scheduled to die on September 21st, 2011. We flew from Occupy to Atlanta, Georgia, to Jackson, the death row prison. We wanted to broadcast from the execution chamber. Why? Because I'm a deep believer in showing the images. You show the pictures. Few people realize in this country how alone we are. The only industrialized country in the world to implement, to execute the death penalty. So we should see it. We should see the prisoner strapped down on a cross-like gurney. We should see the needle put into his arm, and we should see at the very end when they pull the curtain back on the glass window where the audience is, who will view his execution. Now, we couldn't do that, but we were out on the grounds, and the Department of Corrections told us to get to the very edge of the grounds. But the people who had gathered, they had set up a protest pen. They would only allow 150 people on the grounds. We were going to do a many-hour broadcast. I wasn't going to stand there speaking that whole time from the edge of the grounds. Our job as journalists is to go to where the silence is, to put that microphone out and let people speak for themselves. The family of Troy Davis, the human rights leaders from NAACP and Amnesty International, and people from around the world. 1,000 people were across the street. Students had marched from Spelman and Morehouse, the historically black colleges in Atlanta, and so many others holding candles. I looked to the elite journalists on the periphery, and I thought, why aren't they pushing back? Are they really going to report from the edge? But if you have 30 or 60 seconds, you can fill the time. It's not that hard. And then our truck pulled up, our satellite trucks. Sometimes you got to do it like the big boys do. And in this case, our satellite truck was bigger than all of theirs. And that truck came out, and they rolled down their window, and they said, where do you want the truck? And I'm looking nervously over at the prison guards. These guys were bigger, the guys in our truck, than the Oshkosh prison guards. And I'm looking over at the prison guards. They said, well, they're saying, they said, you're paying, where do you want the truck? I said, well, I was thinking right by that protest pen. And they barreled this truck over to the pen. And the guards stepped back when they saw these guys with their cameras get out. And they said, where do you want to stand? And I'm looking at the guards, and I say, well, right against the rope. And they handed me the microphone, and they put orange cones around me to make sure I wasn't bothered, and they said, start broadcasting. And so what did we broadcast? Why is this so important? Well, the Department of Corrections gave us their press packet. And we began by talking about how Troy Anthony Davis would spend his last day. They said from 9 to 3 he would meet with family. From 9 to 3 he would meet with family. And then at 3 o'clock they had to clear out so he could get a routine physical. Routine physical? You know what happened in Texas a while ago? A man attempted suicide on death row. They raced him to the hospital. They got him better. And then they executed him. And then the next page talked about what Troy Anthony Davis would have for dinner. They were very detailed. They said he'd get grilled cheeseburgers, oven-browned potatoes, baked beans, coleslaw, cookies, and a grape beverage. It also listed the lethal cocktail that would follow: pentobarbital, pancuronium bromide, potassium chloride, and Ativan, a sedative. The pentobarbital anesthetizes. The pancuronium bromide paralyzes. The potassium chloride stops the heart. Davis refused the sedative and the Last Supper. By 7 p.m., the U.S. Supreme Court was reportedly reviewing Davis's plea for a stay. The case was referred to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. The Supreme Court denied the plea. Davis's execution began at 10:53 p.m. A prison spokesperson delivered the news to the reporters outside. Time of death, 11:08 p.m. The eyewitnesses to the execution stepped out. According to an Associated Press reporter who was there, these were Troy Davis's final words. "I'd like to address the McPhail family," he said, "let you know, despite the situation you're in, I'm not the one who killed your son, your father, your brother. I'm innocent. The incident that happened that night is not my fault. I did not have a gun. All I can ask is you look deeper into this case so that you really can finally see the truth. I ask my family and friends to continue to fight this fight, and for those about to take my life," he said to his executioners, "God have mercy on your souls, and may God bless your souls." Here he had been executed, and the Pope had asked for clemency. The former prison warden of this death row prison, Alan Alt, had begged for clemency. The former Republican Congress member from Georgia, Bob Barr, had said, "Don't execute Troy Davis." So had the former FBI director, William Sessions, said, "Don't kill Troy Davis," and yet they did. The state of Georgia took Davis's body to Atlanta for an autopsy, charging his family for the transportation. On Troy Davis's death certificate, the cause of death is listed simply as homicide. As we stood on the grounds of the prison, the only national broadcast in this country to be there throughout that evening, no matter what happened, we wanted to show what is done in our name. As we stood on the grounds of the prison just after Troy Davis was executed, the Department of Corrections threatened to pull the plug on our broadcast. The show was over. And I could only think about what Mahatma Gandhi said when asked what he thought of Western civilization. He said, "I think it would be a good idea." And I just want to end right back here in Chicago. I want to end with a woman who taught us, particularly the media, so much about what our obligations are, and that is Mamie Till. Right, Mamie Till, the mother of Emmett Till, who in the summer of 1955, after sending her 14-year-old son Emmett to Money, Mississippi to get out of the city for the summer and be with his aunt and uncle and cousins, he was ripped out of bed in the middle of the night by a white mob. Emmett was a stutterer, and his mother, Mamie Till, taught him, "If you stutter, whistle." The mob said he had wolf whistled at a white woman, and he ended up in the bottom of the Tallahatchie River. When his body was dredged up and sent back here to Chicago for the wake and the funeral, his mother, Mamie Till, did something incredibly courageous. She said, "I want his casket open for the wake and the funeral. I want the world to see the ravages of racism, the brutality of bigotry." Thousands passed by his casket and saw. And then Jet Magazine and other black publications actually took photographs of his distended, mutilated head, and they were published. And they were seared into the history and consciousness of this country. Mamie Till had something very important to teach the press of today. And now, the professor, the preacher, straight from Union Theological Seminary in New York, Cornel West.
Amy Goodman, Amy Goodman, Amy Goodman. Our dear sister Amy Goodman. Very powerful presentation. I want to salute my dear sister Amy. I love her deeply, respect her dearly. My dear brother Tavis Smiley, we've been together now for 25 years. I take a bullet, not in my hand, but in my heart. I love him that much, respect him that deeply. Thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight. I won't take too much time. We won't call and response. That's my tradition. Antiphonal activity back and forth. But my dear sister ended with Mamie Till, and that moves me deeply. Because Amy Till, she stepped the lectern at Robert Temple's Church of God in Christ here in Chicago in August 1955. You all recall what she said. I don't have a minute to hate. I will pursue justice for the rest of my life. That's Mamie Till. And that's the tradition that produced me. That's why when I come to Chicago, I think of the love train that Curtis Mayfield was singing about. People, get ready. Are you ready to get on the train? That's why I gave Brother Lupe a hug, and that's why I love Brother Ali so much, because the artists are not ornamental or decorative. They're constitutive and integral to who we are. If you're really on the love train, if you really have courage to tell the truth and bear witness, and you're not afraid to die, if you're willing to connect with a tradition that's bigger than you. That's why it's serious talk. You see? That last line of Percy Shelley's great pamphlet of 1821, it was a revolutionary pamphlet. What did he say, my dear Sister Tillman? I love you so much. What did Shelley say? He said, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. I want to say that here at the law school. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And by poets, he didn't mean versifiers. He meant all of those who have the courage to use their imagination and empathy to conceive of a world that's better than one where there's too many wretched of the earth, be it in Asia, Africa, Latin America, or the south side of Chicago. And that every law that you enact already presupposes a certain vision of what the world is. So if your world is confined to the status quo, it's going to be truncated legislation. And so when we talk about public airways, we raise the question of public life. Why is it that our public life is so impoverished and so vacuous? It's not just public airways, it's public education. Look at the vicious attack on our precious young people with privatized education. Thank God for Sister Lewis, wherever she is. Thank God for the union. No, let's tell the truth. How you going to have 685 schools and 202 nurses for those precious children? 684 schools and 1 out of 4 even have arts, and we wonder why they can't play instruments like Lakeside or watch 103rd Street Rhythm Band. Public life is so thin in our society. The very bonds that connect us as citizens, not consumers, as human beings concerned about the quality of common good. John Dewey is right. Show me a democracy that has an impoverished public life, and I'll show you one that is dominated by oligarchs and plutocrats driven by profit maximization that will do anything in order to get over and obsess only with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. Oh, yes. Gangster activity is what it is. Scandal after scandal after scandal. And when you get caught, you pay money. You don't go to jail. So let's put this in perspective in light of our poets. Not just the versifiers, not just the musicians. All human beings who conceive of a better world and refuse to defer to the status quo the way it is. And it is a love train. What I like about the three of us, all three of us are on the love train. Oh, yeah. And when you really love folk, you can't stand the fact they're being treated unjustly. When you really love folk, you loathe the fact they're being treated unfairly. And if you don't say something, the rocks are going to shout out. Oh, yes, it's fire in your bones. You got to feel it. It's not just an abstract sensibility. The choice that you make to say, this is the way I want to live my life. Reverend Hatch knows what I'm talking about. Love you, brother. And we need more of it. Why? Because let's be honest about it. We live in a society where everything's up for sale. Everybody's up for sale. Who's talking about integrity? Who's talking about constancy? Who's talking about trying to conceive of another world and be willing to go down swinging like Ella Fitzgerald or Muhammad Ali? And that's what's so sad about the present situation. I'm glad about the fact that we fought against a right-wing takeover of the White House. That's important. But the problem is our politicians, including our dear brother Barack Obama, still has a conservative mentality when it comes to obsession with austerity, austerity. What you gonna cut? What you gonna cut? What you mean what you gonna cut? Start with the prison industrial complex. How come you find money for that all the time? Money, money, money for the prison industrial complex. When you gonna cut that? You found $1 trillion. Gator, you know what I'm talking about. You found $1 trillion in the last 27 years for the prison industrial complex. But when it comes to quality education, quality housing, our dear brother fighting the struggle right there, the Hendersons here in Chicago. When it comes to quality jobs with a living wage, I'm not talking about low-wage jobs. I'm talking about wages where you can feed your family with dignity and decency. You can't find a penny. Well, let's go to the military-industrial complex. Oh, you got money for those smart drones, don't you? Dropping bombs on innocent people. It's about 3,500 now. It's a war crime. That's what it is. You talked about Nagasaki. That's a war crime. Hiroshima, that's a war crime. You don't kill innocent folk. Bin Laden's a gangster. If you're in war against him, okay, maybe, but don't kill his daughter. That's why Emmett Till's mother is so crucial. She could have stepped to that lectern and said, you know what? I'm tired of all these white folk who are silent when it comes to American terrorism called Jim and Jane Crow. Why don't we just start arbitrarily killing some folk? No, she said no. She knew George Bernard Shaw's right. Hatred is the coward's revenge against those who intimidate you. Hatred's always cowardly. She refused to be a coward. She's going to take a high ground. But she was still going to tell the truth. And part of the problem of our public airways, think of it, the $6 billion spent on the election. $2 billion on the presidential election. Hardly a mumbling word about poverty. Hardly a mumbling word about the prison industrial complex. Hardly a mumbling word about the new Jim Crow. Hardly a mumbling word about the trade unions dealing with declining, stagnating wages, with the profits still exponentially growing on the oligarchic greed and plutocratic greed. What kind of public debate did we have? We just had an election. Where's the discussion? Where's the substance? Where's the content? What about the precious children? America is 34 on the top 35 nations of industrial societies when it comes to child poverty. Ahead only Romania. I love Romanians, but they're not on the cutting edge of the struggle for justice. 34 out of 35. Did you hear any serious discussion, public discussion about child poverty? You think Marion Wright Edelman been living for nothing? You think Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer died talking about poverty for nothing? Then how come we can't even raise the issue? Why? Because it's truncated, it's suffocated by the oligarchic and plutocratic interests. And that's just not big words. We're talking about big money, big corporations, big banks. Big banks now get 42% of all the profits in America. That's called the financialization of monopoly capitalism. Or it's another way of saying bankers are not accountable. That's why they can engage in criminal activity like insider trading, market manipulation, and predatory lending, and not one of them persecuted, investigated, not one go to jail. Let Jamal get caught on the corner south side of Chicago. He going straight to jail. Quick. Bring some of his partners too. How long can we put up with it? How long are we going to put up with it? That's what we're talking about today. We're at that precipice. The relation between prison-industrial complex, the military-industrial complex, Wall Street oligarchic complex, and then the corporate media multiplex. Fox News. PowerPoints of the conservative version of oligarchic rule in the country. Call the Republican Party. They're in deep trouble. They've got some xenophobic challenges. MSNBC, PowerPoint of the Obama administration. Very colorful. Oh, they got colorful faces on there now. I love each and every one of them. I'm a Christian. I love everybody. You know that, Father Flager. People got upset. I called the president a black mascot of Wall Street oligarchs. I'm a Christian. I love mascots. But when you bail out banks, now to the tune of $16 trillion, but refuse to bail out homeowners, or when you bail out your workers, you can brag about bailing out your workers, but how come they had to change their contracts, deal with lower wages, deal with layoffs, but Wall Street didn't have their contracts touched so that the compensation for executives continue to be obscene and profane, and nobody could raise a mumbling word in the corporate truncated multiplex. Thank God for Amy Goodman. Thank God for Tavis Smiley on television. That's true. It's true. And there's no way we will ever be able to reinvigorate and rejuvenate our public life unless we have what Socrates had. You turn to line 24a in Plato's Apology. Right before he was putting him to death, condemning him to death, he stood there before the jury. He said, "Parrhesia is the cause of my unpopularity." And parrhesia is fearless speech, plain speech, frank speech, unintimidated speech, telling the truth whatever the price is, trying to tell the truth and allowing the suffering to speak, acknowledging you're fallible, but at the same time knowing that there's too much mendacity and lying going on in the corporate truncated multiplex. Or even a Christian like myself, Jesus crucified. Why? Because when he went to Jerusalem, he went straight to the temple. And what did he do in that temple? He ran out the money changers. And the temple at that time was a combination of Wall Street, Hollywood, recording, video, radio industry, and White House, Congress, State House, and City Hall. Talking about you, Brother Rom. Yeah, that's right. I'm talking about you. That's right. That's right. Yes, that's right. Uh-huh. That's right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I don't hate individuals. I hate injustice. I don't care what color they are. I don't care what religion or non-religion they have. It's a matter of trying to be honest and to make sure people are accountable, answerable, and responsible, especially when it comes to the least of these, especially when it comes to the orphan and the widow and the fatherless and the motherless and the poor, gay brothers, lesbians, sisters, bisexual, black, brown. Let us never forget our precious indigenous brothers and sisters. 1492, World War I started. It's still going on right now. I'm going to talk about it if I'm the last brother in the country that does. They're my brothers and sisters, too. Brother Danny knows what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah. And that's a tradition that's open to all of us, no matter what color we are. It's the choices that we make. Are we going to be so seduced and tempted by the monies dangled, the status and wealth offered? Or are we going to be on our way to the grave so when the worms get us and start finally getting to our bodies, they'll say, this person was on fire for something bigger than just the ground and the worms. It was about love. It was about justice. Yes, justice is what love looks like in public, but any justice that is only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice, you're going to need the love supreme that John Coltrane was talking about if we're going to seriously expand the public airways, because we need vision, we need organizing, mobilizing, love at the center of it, open across race, across sexual orientation, across ethnicity, yes, even across class, but we're looking at the world from the vantage point of those Malcolm X said, catching hell. And some of us are going to go down fighting to ensure that their humanity is always affirmed. Thank you all so very much.
One more time for Dr. Cornel West and Amy Goodman. There's a microphone in this aisle right here to my right. There's a microphone to my left here. We've got about 40 minutes, and we're gonna. Amy and Doc are gonna shorten their responses. I'll keep mine short so we can cover as much as we can in the 40 minutes that we have. So if you make your questions or comments to the point, we promise to give answers to the point. We're gonna cover as many of your questions and comments as we can in these 40 minutes. Sir, you go.
Thank you so much, Mr. Smiley, Ms. Goodman, Dr. West, for being here. I really appreciate it. Just one thing I want to say is that I do believe that liberal bias is probably the biggest, liberal bias in the mainstream media is probably the biggest conspiracy theory that is plaguing us today in America. The fourth estate, as you said, has been hijacked by the 1%. Movements like Occupy have utilized YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, live streams, WikiLeaks to help fill this void in the mainstream media. I'd like to address this first to Dr. Cornel West. I'm absolutely moved right now, so I'm just a little shaken up. You were amazing. How do we continue as individual citizens to take back control of the fourth estate and to continue to utilize the alternative sources that we're using to our advantage as American citizens? Thank you.
And that question had to do with the state. Was it the state, though, brother?
The fourth estate.
For the state.
The fourth estate, yeah. Journalism, media. Yeah.
Oh, the fourth estate.
Yeah, estate, yeah.
I got you. Yes, indeed, indeed. Well, really, I think Amy Goodman's in much better position than myself, though, brother, to answer that question.
Amy, you want to answer right quick?
It was a question. How do we take back the fourth estate?
How do we take back the fourth estate?
Well, Amy's been actually doing it in her own way.
Right, Amy, yeah. We got to move on. Yeah.
I mean, just very quickly, I think we have to create our own media, and we have to challenge the corporate media to open up, both. Because there is too much at stake right now, and the media is the way we learn about the world, and the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Instead, it's wielded as a weapon of war, and we can turn that around. There's much media in this country that is underutilized, and if we don't use it, we will lose it. Like CAN TV here, public radio, and public television. These are your airwaves, and you have a right to determine how they're used.
I remind you right quick, when I spoke tonight, I mentioned WRTE, and when you go home tonight, Google it and read about this deal that is now pending before the FCC, and consider what's going to happen to that station once it gets, as I said, colonized by BEZ. Amy comes behind me in her remarks tonight and talks about how she used to be heard on a particular station until WLUW, until BEZ bought it. So I'm not demonizing or casting aspersion on them. I'm answering your question directly that there is something that can be done. Those of us who care about, as Amy said, owning and having access to our airwaves, when something like this is on the precipice of going down, here's a chance for folk in Chicago to actively engage on the particular question. Thank you for your question. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. My name is Robert Moore, and one of the main problems I think that we have in the black community is that there is no cohesive plan. Amy even talked about, after the bombing in Hiroshima and so on, that we created the Marshall Plan. The black community lack a plan, and of course the tools in which to be able to help the community. Our children are dying just as if we were in a foreign country. I'm a military man. I stayed in the military for 7 years. No way in the hell that we should allow our children to die in our community the way they are dying. No way. No way in hell. We are getting beat merely because not because of just a lack of organizing. It's because we have no headquarters. We have no place to meet. Please understand me clearly. Clearly understand me. I've been in the church umpteen years. The fact of the matter is this. We must build headquarters in the urban communities that are open 24 hours a day for the purpose of taking back your own community. Churches, other places, like we're here tonight, of course. I'm so tired of going to places and meetings and they flashing the light. You ain't got to go home, but you got to leave here. There are people in this room would come 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and work on things dealing with veterans, homelessness, constantly. So I would say, Tavis, as you traveling on your way, and you hear about us building an Economic Development Research Center, right, where the old Kennedy King is located here in this city. Sure. But everywhere, all over this country, black folks, poor folks need a headquarters and a home to take care of business 24 hours a day.
I got to flash that light. Let me just, I want to just say right quick in 2 seconds. And I know the point you were making, and I take it. But Doc and I have this conversation all the time. I get annoyed sometimes when I hear this notion inside of Black America that there is no plan. Let me take you back 8 years ago, before the country had ever heard of Barack Hussein Obama. There was a book that we put together that came out of the State of the Black Union Symposia that we did every year. The book was called The Covenant with Black America. You know it. It stayed at #1, not on the list, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for 14 weeks. #1 on the Times list for 14 weeks. I put the book together, compiled it and edited it with all kinds of other great voices in Black America. We put the book out. I gave the contract for the book to Third World Press right here in Chicago, Hakeem Adabudi. I gave him the contract. They made millions of dollars off that book. I gave every dime of it to them. I could have done it through my own imprint. I gave it to them. I didn't want people thinking that I was enriching myself on the book. So I gave the contract to another publisher for them to make millions of dollars. Stays at #1 for 14 weeks. That was the plan that black folk and across the country had come up with for what we were going to do to hold whoever the next president was going to be accountable to the interests of Black America. This is pre-Barack Obama. That was the plan. The book is on the list for 14 weeks. Everybody's on the same page. These are our 10 principles. These are our 10 points. When you campaign and come to us, we want to know, where do you stand on these 10 issues in the covenant with Black America? And the minute this Negro named Barack Obama showed up on the scene, everybody forgot about the book. We forgot about the plan. We forgot about the issues. And all the black leaders were silenced and sidelined from the campaign up until now. So I about had it with folks saying we ain't got no plan. We had a plan. We abandoned it when a black man showed up and nobody wanted to say anything because we wanted to help him get elected. I'm okay with that. But then after he got elected, we didn't want to say anything, give him time. And then the argument was, let him get a second term. Well, here we are. Here we are now. We will see what happens to that plan. Yes, sir.
I first of all want to say thank you, because it's nice knowing that all adults in America are completely crazy. My name's Ethan Beats Van Leer. I'm 17 years old, and I was born and raised in Chicago. And I hear you saying we have to go to the president, we have to push him. And I'm just thinking about all my friends and all I've seen, the brothers and like sons that have been sent to prison and daughters and mothers like abused by this system, like destroyed, and then you're asking them to turn around and go to their molester and rapist and like abuser and say, please help us. And I'm just trying to find like the medium between fighting for change and then telling them to go for the system that is destroying them. So I just want to hear you.
That is a question for Cornel West. I can assure you.
Yeah, my good brother. Powerful brother. Powerful brother. Very, very powerful brother. No, we can feel the heartfelt quality of your deep question, though, brother. And one of the reasons why I like to accent love and justice is that it means that you're willing to do things that mean you pay a price. part of our problem, this is not true just in black America, but it reflects the question, that when people become obsessed with comfort and obsessed with convenience, then it leads toward callousness and indifference toward the suffering of others. And when we talk about what you reflected in your question, the young precious brothers and sisters, but disproportionately brothers shot down like dogs, sometimes each other, sometimes it's the police. They stop and frisk over and over again. We know, one, if that were happening on the vanilla side of town, there would be a major crisis from White House, maybe even Supreme Court would want to kick in on it. You see what I mean? We also know in the black community, if that were happening to black middle class, upper middle class, precious youth, the Jack and Jill sisters and brothers, we'd have a different kind of black leadership. The mass incarceration is also a class-ridden incarceration. It's about poor black, poor brown, poor red. And once our leadership no longer came from the Martin Kings and Fannie Lou Hamers, who were willing to pay a price, but moved into the electoral political system, Harold Washington is the last figure that's a hybrid in that regard. He's connected to movement outside, and when he moves inside and knows he has to connect with outside in order to deal with the right wing inside. But most of our politicians, including black politicians, had moved rightward as the country moved rightward in its electoral political sensibilities. And in moving rightward, it meant that they could have whole campaigns and not say a word about the gun violence. Whole campaigns and not say a word about civic terrorism. Whole campaigns and not say a word about gun control. Unemployment, underemployment. The country has 8. Everybody's breaking down on the way to the crack house. Well, black communities had 17, 18 for 50 years. What do you think's been going on there? It's that truncated view that needs to be shattered. And it's going to take a while. And the only way you do it is by example. You have to continually talk about it over and over. You have to organize around it. You have to be willing to sacrifice. And some of us must be willing to die. That's the only way you can do it. It's the only way you can do it. That's the only way poor people have ever done it, anywhere in the world. And that's the way it's going to be done here, if it's doable. Now, it might be the case that the right-wing forces are so vicious that they'd rather just kill us all. That's a possibility. I'm a black man in America. That's a real possibility. Exactly. But I'm a Jesus-loving black man, too, which means I'm free. But if that's the case, then the empire is just imploding. It doesn't have the capacity to regenerate itself. And if that's the case, all we can do is go down and fight. But we don't know. It's an open question. But most importantly is we want you to know that some of us old school folk, we loving you, loving your partners, and we're going to go down swinging to support y'all.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Amy, I want to thank you for this third-party debate I saw on your show. And one of the things that really struck me is, while I don't agree with Mr. Good on a lot of things, one of the things he really stated was putting a moratorium on all this cheap foreign labor coming into the country, displacing American citizens. Right now, Jim Crow is being acted upon in Silicon Valley when it comes to tech workers. And all you have to do is talk...
Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
All you have to do is talk to John Templeton or Len Canty or Harry Alford, who's written about this, if you know who these people are. And so I haven't heard this discussion. If we're really serious about creating jobs, why we're still allowing in over 1 million foreign legal workers still into the country every year. And Tavis, I gave you this information at St. Sabina a while back. And I'd like to see people talk about this, because what good is the 14th Amendment and being an American citizen working in my own country when big corporations are just using these visa programs and illegal aliens to just to suppress wages for American citizens? And
let him finish.
Got it. All right.
You get my point.
Got it. We got it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Yes, sir.
So thank you so much for coming today. My question is about multi-party democracy. Usually on the left, there's a call for a third party, or independence with a call for third party, but generally there's never a call for sort of structural change to American democracy in terms of rule changes to create a parliamentary democracy. And I understand that the left is wary of electoral politics. And I understand that mass mobilization in the form of politics creates their social change. But my real question is, what effects would you think a multi-party democracy in terms of a parliamentary system have in the United States in terms of allowing for the left to have a voice and encouraging transformative and, dare I say it, transgressive politics?
I'm going to make Amy talk. Amy, talk. Talk, Amy, talk.
I just want to share something we did on Democracy Now! During these presidential debates. You referred to third parties, because I think it's not about individuals. It's not about the major party candidates or the third party candidates. It's about expanding the debate, opening up the discussion. So when the first presidential debate happened at University of Denver, I don't know how many of you saw what we did, but we went down the street in Denver. And it was Jim Lehrer, right, the host of the PBS NewsHour, who was the moderator. And we went online, saw the workers, putting up the banner. We wanted to see what it would look like in the hall. A bright blue banner. We had one of these banners. We rented podiums that looked like their podiums, and we brought in 2 third-party candidates, Jill Stein of the Green Party, Rocky Anderson of the Justice Party. And we broadcast this on PBS, NPR, community stations all over the country that night. Jim Lehrer welcomed people to the debate, and I think he said that President Obama won the coin toss. He would have 2 minutes to talk about the economy. President Obama talked about the economy for 2 minutes, then Mitt Romney spoke about the economy for 2 minutes. We paused the videotape. We had these 2 third-party candidates just down the road in a Comcast facility. And I said, Dr. Jill Stein, you have 2 minutes on the economy. Then Mayor Anderson, he's a former mayor of Salt Lake City, Justice Party presidential candidate. Okay, Mayor Anderson, you have 2 minutes. He spoke for 2 minutes on the economy, and I said, back to my colleague Jim Lehrer at the University of Denver. And that's how we conducted the debate. And what I'll say came out of this, as you talk about prisons, as we now deal with climate change, do you know that for the 3 presidential debates, there was not one reference either by the news moderators, the debate moderators, or the candidates to climate change, right? Their poverty was hardly addressed. No questions, and then it's not addressed. And so we expand the debate, and you hear what a true discussion sounds like of these critical issues. And that's what we must do in the public media, is bust the debate wide open and bring other voices into it.
All right. I'm watching this clock. All right, Gator.
First of all, my brothers, I'm glad y'all came. Amy, it's a pleasure meeting you. Lupe, I love you. Yeah, I got you, yeah. The most important thing with everyone here, we need to let Rom know that there is someone in this town that do know how to help stop since the shooting and killing. I ain't got no problem with putting my life on the line. It's been on the line.
Oh, Lord, yes.
Well, we all need to know that Gator knows how to help bring it down. Dorothy, no. She cussed me out, but she made sure that I do what I do to help bring the violence down. I love you, Dorothy. I ain't signified, but you made me a better man.
That's love. That's love. That's called love.
Yeah, that's love. But I'm saying, with this public debate, we all hear how the major media constantly put on the line that nobody know what to do about stopping this violence. Then because of social media and Google, we go back and show them what we did in the 90s when we brought it down from 900 a year to 600 a year. I want to say this for those that are in public media. Take your little 2 minutes from me and let it be known that y'all got the right to take a camera into the institutions to interview Larry Hoover and Jeff Ford to get their support to help stop this violence, because they don't want nobody to hear that them brothers is telling them The senseless shootings and killings got to stop. The raping of women and children got to stop. The robbing of our elders got to stop. And those that are violated get no love, honor, respect in the streets or in the penitentiaries.
Thank you. Before I go to the next question, a couple of things. Brother Ali, who is here, who Doc referenced earlier, Brother Ali's here.
Brother Ali.
Is going to perform at the very end. So just before the top of the hour, Brother Ali's going to come on stage and perform, number one. Number two, Amy is signing books. Amy is signing books? No, I'm not signing books. Amy is signing books. In the lobby tonight, Amy Goodman is signing books. The Silence Majority, I highly recommend it. So Amy's going to be in the lobby afterwards. And for those, again, in the overflow area, if you stay there just for a second, we're going to run over there right quick. While Brother Ali's performing here, we're going to run over there and say hello to you in the overflow areas for those who are here. Having said that, yes, sir.
Thanks. My question is about media and independent media and public media. Like, having just had the election, I guess I'm really wondering how does the independent media avoid getting sucked into what Howard Zinn called election madness, which seems to go on for longer every 4 years. And Democracy Now's coverage, I think, was really great with expanding the debate. But I feel like even within the independent media, like when the election season is happening, other stories get dropped. And how can we avoid that? How can the media sort of get truly independent so that people aren't also during election year thinking, okay, I want to report on stories, but I also want to make sure that the better candidate wins, because as much as we might think that, when you're thinking about that, you're not being independent media. So that's my question. Thanks.
I think we just have to do our jobs always. We have to dig deep. We are not a part of the parties. We are apart from the parties. I think that's the problem Tavis has, is that he is there as a journalist. He's not there to be in someone's camp. I know for years the networks would say, well, whose side are you going to come out on today? Because you're either going to come out for the Republican or the Democrat, because they set up these polar debates, right, between the Democrat and the Republican. And I would say neither side. First of all, there's not just two sides, but that's not our job as journalists. But they didn't know how else to have a discussion. But as I said earlier, I think most people fall outside that spectrum. When the two major party presidential candidates were talking about drones, they don't disagree with each other. On the issue of war, they don't disagree with each other. On poverty, they don't talk about it. Climate change, they don't talk about it. So we have a very big job to do. The whole world is open to us to cover these issues and to ensure that other voices are brought in, like all of you here and all over. It's a huge job. That's what we have to do.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm a product of a slave family, and I spent most of my life here in Chicago, but I've had the privilege of experiencing both lifestyles. But also, I'm a veteran from the Marines, and we were taught we could run up the John Hancock building and run down the other side. I have a business that I've operated for the last 35 years in this city that's been union, and we have been catastrophically stumped by white unions. And my question is, how do we get a union that would represent African American tradesmen and allow our kids to be trained by African American professionals such as myself?
Oh, no, it's Pittsburgh. He was in Philly, but he's from Pittsburgh. Yeah. Well, one, brother, I don't really know the internal dynamics of the union movement in Chicago, but every trade union movement I know, and I'm very much in solidarity with working people in their organizations, but they do have white supremacist challenges. And we got to help our white brothers and sisters. We've got to help our white brothers, just like the sisters have to help us with the male supremacist challenge. And the gay lesbians have to help us with the straight challenge and so forth. Those outside the United States have to help us with our imperial sensibilities, thinking American lives are worth more than lives on the West Bank, or in Tel Aviv, or in Ethiopia or Guatemala. So that the struggle against racism in any institution, including the trade union movement, is a very important movement. The question is, given the balance of forces, do you have an independent union? Do you have the same union as your white brothers and sisters, brown brothers and sisters, red, yellow, and so forth? And I don't know which union you're talking about. I don't know what the relation is between your union and the other unions. But all I would say is, in principle, every trade unionist ought to be a radical anti-racist. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that.
Thank you, and help.
Thank you very much. Yes, hey.
First of all, I want to thank Amy Goodman, for the coverage that you did down there at Hurricane Katrina. We call it Hurricane America, for keeping public housing on the forefront on people's minds even 4 years after Hurricane Katrina. I want to thank you for that.
That's right.
Brother Tavis, Brother Cornell, to send you to New York.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm forever grateful, our organization, for the exposure you gave us on the poverty tour. Had it not been for that coverage, they would have demonized us, taking homes, saying it was crack houses, we was trying to trap houses, but we actually was doing it to house our homeless women and children in our community. There ain't no more public housing, right? America has defunded public housing. Being a human rights organizer, I got it from Martin and Malcolm. They said, go to the Organization of American States. Martin Luther said, poor people and human rights. That's where the movement was going.
That's right.
My question is, right, first of all, shameless plug, 1279 North Milwaukee tomorrow at 11 o'clock. We're going to be protesting neighborhood housing services who get government money and is trying to evict Mr. Henderson that you brought up. Why is it so hard to recognize human rights in America, one of the countries that's the biggest military enforcers of human rights, supposedly, yet they don't look at things in a human rights context in America? One, like I said, I'm grateful for the exposure y'all gave us. It stopped them from demonizing our movement. My question is, and it's a big ask, because the brother he alluded to it around the violence in Chicago. There's this piece called the Conventions on the Rights of the Child that the University of Northwestern and several other youth groups that I work with helped get the city of Chicago to sign. Yet no one has held them accountable. When you're finished with the poverty tour, can we do a tour about the value of life of young African-American children in these urban communities? This is not just going on in Chicago. I have done a study of Gary, Indiana, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the city of Chicago, a regional conflict. These ain't gang wars. These are child soldiers. They are taking part in a war that they didn't ask for. So if y'all could, please give some exposure to this youth violence in the context of poverty, human rights, and the Conventions on the Rights of the Child. And I will forever, like I said, be grateful. Thank you.
We take that. We take that. We take that. We'll talk later. I'm traveling the country right now working on a special.
Well, I know he was just at the United Nations raising this issue and the legacy of Malcolm X. Absolutely.
We're working on a primetime special for PBS that airs after the first of the years. We should talk about that. Some of these issues are covered in that special that we're working on right now, so we'll talk. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
During Occupy, do you remember Sir Pepper Sprays a lot at UC Davis?
Oh, yes.
So when people were outraged by him, I wasn't, because I had already seen the truth of how the cops had practiced in Pittsburgh in 2009 at the G20 summit. I saw the truth that the kids videotaped the University of Pittsburgh students. But you didn't know this, they were beaten and bloodied by the police who were practicing there. Some of the students videotaped this, and I had the privilege of seeing that footage that was shared internally to a little documentary footage group and discussed there. So I saw the truth that the American police are militarized, and nobody else in America did, because it wasn't broadcast on the national news. You didn't see it. I also took a Twitter account on there because it was the way to get around the city safely. People were tweeting where the police were, where the protesters were. You could see everything happening in real time. So Amy, your kitchen table is here. It's up to us to pull up our chairs to it and use it, and to tell the feds not to take it away by throttling how information is used on the internet and how our voices can be heard in that way. We can choose to use that now. I'm interested in hearing from you guys what the barriers are to this community giving voice, encouraging voice, and listening to each other so that this community can happen when you guys aren't here on the internet, so that we can facilitate this out of each other using the tools that we have with these little things and all the phones I see everybody shooting pictures of with each other in this space. Can you speak to that and what we can do and what obstacles you see to that happening right now?
Well, this issue of the militarization of the police is a very serious one. We have something called the Posse Comitatus Act in the United States that says that we think it's a good thing, it's a law, that soldiers shouldn't march through the streets of the United States. And I think the way the authorities are getting around that is by militarizing the police. I mean, there is a serious crackdown on dissent that is taking place, but also people are organizing, so you have this push and pull. I mean, there's no one better that discusses this than the former police chief of Seattle, Norm Stamper, who was the one who was in charge of the police during the protests in Seattle at the Battle of Seattle in 1999. And I mean, he met these thousands of people with so much force on the part of his police, rubber bullets, pepper spray. He now says it was the worst mistake of his life. And he's the one who is one of the leading spokespeople against the militarization of police, saying we are attacking our daughters, our grandmothers, and we are setting up the police to be apart from rather than protecting the community. Mm-hmm. And why it matters with journalists all over this country is the serious crackdown on journalists. I was arrested along with my colleagues at Democracy Now! In 2008 at the Republican convention, the first day. I mean, they arrested more than 40 reporters there, and it's very important that reporters be able to cover what's happening on the ground. I mean, this is a longer discussion, and we don't have time for it, but we sued the Twin City authorities and won an unprecedented settlement. They arrested Sharif Abdel Qaddus, Nicole Salazar, and Sharif wasn't arrested covering Mubarak's, Egypt during the revolution, but he's arrested in the streets of the United States attempting to cover what's supposed to be a celebration of democracy, a convention. And it's something that we have to take extremely seriously.
So, thank you. So, nobody else get in line, but for all those persons who have been kind enough to stand, if I give you 15 or 20 seconds, can you make your basic point right quick?
Right.
We got a deal?
Right.
I will cut you off if you don't. But if you make your basic point in 20 seconds, nobody standing will be unheard. And Brother Ali, if you can start making your way this way for the performance, we have honored to have Brother Ali here tonight, and we're going to make our way to the other room to say hello to these other persons in these overflow spaces. But I hate when people stand, don't get a chance to be heard. So I'm going to go back and forth. You got 20 seconds, whatever your point is, question, just get it out, so at least it's out there. Yes, sir. Show them how to do this.
All right. I just had a really quick question, actually. The narrative after the election has been that America, which has always been described as a center-right country, is now moving center-left due to the changing demographics. And I just wanted to get your opinion on whether you feel like America really is moving center-left.
In our closing comments, we try to figure out what we think we can answer. We're making mental notes of the questions, so we'll get to as much as we can. Thank you. Yes, sir. Very nicely done, by the way. Yes, sir.
Brian Monte, former VON alum, also journalist, independent filmmaker. And my question is, we can always address the issue. We can clearly enunciate, and like we do on WVON, we'd always could state the problem. My issue all the time was, what are we going to do about it? And where are we going to go? You brothers come from other cities. I respect what you do. However, we need to somehow galvanize and depolarize what's happening in these different cities and get some unity going. So just let me know what is your plan to make that happen.
Got it. Yes, sir.
Hello, Amy Goodman and Dr. West. This is Blake Lenore, the guy from the Green Festival. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
And here's my message about capitalism. We must end capitalism here in America and all over the world, period. Brothers and sisters, and Cuba, Iran, and some other countries were used to be allies a long time ago, but not anymore due to our capitalistic behavior and all of our wicked deeds that destroyed not only their native heritage, but the native environment, but the ecosystems that the endangered plants and animals live in, and so forth.
Hey.
We must, and we gotta, and let's end capitalism right now. God bless you, and hallelujah.
All right. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. I just want to make a couple of comments, and I don't want to turn this into a medical issue, but this is specifically more about our rights. Here in Illinois, one of the largest medical umbrellas is Advocacy. It's very similar in LA because I lived in LA for a long time to Kaiser Permanente.
Oh, yeah, sure.
We are at the point where, as employees, we are actually forced to take the flu shot, or we will be fired. And they've done it in such a way, I don't have to tell you guys, you know about this, they've done it in a way where it's perfectly legal. So I want everybody to know we have no rights. For those of you guys who think we do, we really don't. That's my first comment. You know, we have to fight for them, just as you said. My second comment, briefly, is I know this as a 54-year-old African-American woman, oftentimes assumed for something else. And I know it as a Muslim woman. We have become a nation somehow that has just become so unempathetic. The things that I have seen happen, the things that I have heard personally, when I go out of my house every day and I walk down the street, I have had friends walk behind me just to see if it's true. It's unbelievable. It's something that you really have to be a woman, and you have to be a woman with this on your head to see how people really, really treat you. You know, I have lived the life as an African American because I am, and because I'm 54, and I have also lived the life of an immigrant. And I'm telling you, it's hell. Other times I have been treated much better because people think that I'm an immigrant than I would be, and then when they find out I'm black, I have lost jobs. So something has happened with our moral conscience where we've shifted and we've become very cruel, and we don't see the humanistic nature in each other anymore, and we need to bring that back if we all say that we're God-fearing people. That's my comment.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
This is my first time hearing you guys speak, and I'd just like to say it was a pleasure. It was a very enlightening experience. And I just have a quick comment to make about earlier you guys talked about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you talked about the education being a huge issue in this country. And as a former soldier, and I'm now a college student, at the height of the Iraq war, we were spending roughly about $30 billion a month. Now, a lot of folks know that that's about as much as we spend a year for the Department of Education. And we talk about the drone program and this huge overreach of what I feel has been presidential power within the past decade or so. And although it was started in the Bush administration, Obama took it to another level. And I'd just like to know, what were you guys' thoughts? Because oftentimes we talk about the wars, but yet the public is so far removed from the wars because there's such a small amount of people that are fighting the wars, less than 1% of the American population. And I would just like to know, what were your thoughts on that?
Great question. We got it. Yes.
Hi. I would like to revive the question on illegal immigration by maybe framing it in a different way. My first question is, how should we engage right-wing politics that kind of shrouds itself in false populism? It seemed like his question had a very serious populist component to it about getting jobs in America, and how should we engage that, especially as people in the media, Amy. And my second question is, I don't think he would be asking that question had he really understood the struggles of illegal immigrants. How do people in the privileged class engage those type of oppressed groups, understand those struggles, and move forward?
Powerful question. Yes.
I'd like to thank the entire panel for this evening. My name is Roderick with Occupy Chicago. The question I have is, the workers of Walmart are starting to unite to form a union, which they've learned from China how to unionize. So, Black Friday, yes, China has unions for Walmart workers. Black Friday seems to be going to be a big event. Possibly walking out. I hope no one shops there. But I was just hoping if you could spare some time to possibly broadcast from one of the stores or what have you come Black Friday.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, the question is for Dr. West. We've been following a capitalist system since colonial times, and it's making poor people poor, rich too rich. But I'm also sick of the voting system, because every time we vote, we're voting for this capitalist system. How do we erase the brainwashing by our politicians to vote when their decisions have caused the pandemonium that we're facing in the world?
So, first of all, let's appreciate and thank all the persons who stood in line and asked all these wonderful questions and raised these wonderful issues. Amy, there's no way we could respond to everything that was said, but I know you have a closing thought you'd like to share that may wrap some of that together in your own inimitable style. Then we'll give Dr. West a final thought as well.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming out here. Don't give up on the media. Fight for the media. Fight for it to open up, to expand, to be that kitchen table that we're all a part of. You know, static isn't a good thing in the media, but I think we need the media to give us the dictionary definition of static. Criticism, opposition, unwanted interference. We need a media that covers power, not covers for power. We need a media that is the fourth estate, not for the state. And we need a media that covers the movements that create static and make history. And there's no better time than right now.
Amy Goodman. Amy Goodman, Democracy Now! Brother West?
Well, I just want to say it was a blessing to be here, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. And this question about center-right, you know, the vast majority of Americans actually want universal health care. It's true. The vast majority of Americans believe we live in a system that is so tilted toward the wealthy and the powerful that it's unfair and it's unjust. The problem is it doesn't translate because our electoral political system is so dominated with big money, dominated with big banks, dominated with big corporations. And so the sense of impotence, helplessness, feeling as if the best we can do is a black Rockefeller Republican. He's a centrist. He's my brother. He's dealing with right-wing terrain. He's got a right-wing mentality and talking about austerity, but that's the best we can do in translating the concerns. Don't give up on those Americans who are deeply compassionate. But it usually takes the form of charity, not justice. They give willingly of their money. They give willingly of their money. Bill Gates is a very charitable brother. He's given a whole lot of money. That's a beautiful thing, but that's charity. That's not justice. He gives out of his heart, but we need a change in the system. And so I come out of the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou. Martin called for what when he died? Revolution. The man was a revolutionary Christian. That's my kind of Christian. But it was a love. It was a democratic process. It was resistance, and keep it as nonviolent as you possibly can, but keep track of the FBI. You keep track of the CIA and COINTELPRO. But what we need is a revolution. We need a revolutionary change that shifts from the powers of oligarchs to the powers of everyday people. And you do that democratically, step by step. That's what we're talking about.
One more time for Dr. Cornel West. Let me ask you to thank Haymarket Books for making this gathering possible. Please thank Haymarket Books. Please thank Haymarket Books for making this evening possible. WCPT, we thank you. WVON, we thank you as well. Dr. West mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. He and I agree on this, that Dr. King is the greatest American this country has ever produced. That's my assessment, the greatest American the country's ever produced. And Dr. King said this simply but poignantly: cowardice asks, is it safe? Expediency asks, is it politic? Vanity asks, is it popular? But conscience asks, is it right? And every now and then we must take positions that are neither comfortable, safe, politic, or convenient, but we take these positions because our conscience tells us that is right. Thank you for coming out.